Now it is.
Okay, well, I guess we can begin whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm here on February 8th, in the year 2013, with the artist Perreault.
That's nice.
We're here to discuss his artwork.
No, you're not.
We're not? We're not here to discuss his artwork? His art philosophy? His influence of contemporary culture on his artwork?
Perhaps.
How would you say contemporary culture affects your artwork?
It does affect the artwork.
In what ways? How is contemporary culture relevant in your work?
It depends on what contemporary culture we're referring to.
The subject matter of your artwork. What would you say the subject matter of your artwork is?
The subject matter is political, generally speaking, but politics covers a wide field of interest, so the artwork covers a wide field of interest as well.
Would you say it was socially relevant?
Yes, everything is socially relevant.
And would you say you had your work had a particular genre or political slant?
No, I would say nothing to that extent. I would say that you'd have to look at the artwork and determine what that particular artwork is saying. Just coming out and saying that you have a particular political slant is kind of dictatorial. I don't know exactly what's going to be said until after I make the artwork.
And what inspires your sense of imagery and subject matter?
What inspires the imagery and subject matter? Well, I suppose survival of the species to some extent.
So you'd say you were Darwinian in philosophy?
Yes.
How so? Can you explain that?
Can I explain Darwin's theory? Is that what you're asking? Or you're asking how is it that the artwork is like Darwin's theory? Or you're asking, does the artwork express channels to survive, as in if it was a Darwinian thing?
Well, I suppose we could break that down two ways. One is, how is Darwin's influence in your work? And also, how do you consider your artwork relevant to the survival of the species?
I think artwork tends to point out what's going on in the culture at the particular time that the artwork is created. So all artwork is timely. If you have artwork that denies the reality of the times that you live within, then you are not getting information that will reflect what is actually happening during those time periods. So you can have nonsense art, you can have religious art, you can have artwork which is basically decorative, or you can have artwork which communicates the idea of what is perceived to be going on at the time that the artwork is being made. This is not necessarily accepted in any format, but it can be very telling. I think that's why the artwork is important in a Darwinian way.
Long pause.
A long pause, yes.
The mediums you use and the way you use your palette.
You like my suit? I put it on just for this occasion. I'm going to go paint it afterwards.
Oh, how very interesting.
Not really, but please continue.
It's nice to know that you learned how to tie a tie in your later years?
I knew how to tie a tie before, but it wasn't very useful to be painting in suits.
Is it still not useful to paint in suits?
Not unless the suit is going to become a piece of art, and I've done that, but under the circumstances, the suit now seems to be a costume, and the costume is part of the performance. So here we are.
The different paintings I've seen of your work seem to have a very storybook quality to them. How would you explain that?
What do you mean by storybook?
They tell a story with imagery. There's a complexity to them, where you want to find the beginning, the end, and a middle.
Well, all artworks tend to tell a story. If you have figures in your artwork, as I do, then the figures are in an act. They're doing something, and in the process of doing, it relates to a story that we can interpret. But art doesn't move, unlike film. And unlike cartoons, there is no sequence of events to the art. There is only that one piece, and ultimately it's always just the one piece. So it is telling a story as interpreted by the viewer. The viewer provides the content. I only provide a moment.
So your perspective of the painting is less important than the viewer's perspective of the painting?
Well, the perspective of the painting is a creation of mine, but ultimately it's more people who are going to be witnessing and creating perspectives of the painting than just me alone. So I would say there is some equality to that.
Do you ever feel that someone's interpretations of your painting misrepresent your objectives?
In politics, there's always somebody misrepresenting something. So I can't be concerned with how that's going to all fall out. The painting is what it is. People will lay down all kind of ideas as to what it means. Some people will simply lie and say it means something that they want it to mean for their own purposes. And people will see it and experience it for what it is based upon the history they've lived through. I can't force people to see the same things that I see.
And getting because your head's dropping. So how do you pick your materials and your mediums?
Depends on the painting. Once you start a painting, there's a choreography that begins, and you have to satisfy the needs of each individual work. If you start off with a work and you think you're going to create something very simple, it may become more complex because the composition demands certain qualities that you hadn't considered when you originally started the painting. You may, as I did in this sequence of paintings, begin very simply, and then the paintings become more complex as you proceed along. If you look at some of my early works, the early works are extraordinarily complex, involving multiple materials, and then they become simpler and flatter, using less alien materials to actual paint and more physical objects. They start to leave, but then they come back, and I suspect that we'll see a lot more of that in the future. Paintings demand what they need according to the particular artist's genre of materials that he's used to using. I will use most anything, but I sometimes just return to just paint. Sometimes just ink on paper.
And is there a particular reason you choose to paint versus other forms of art, such as sculpture or mixed media?
Well, I have made some sculptural pieces, and those sculptural pieces tend to be paintings in 3D. So I would say ultimately it's all painting. Painting has a certain quality to it that is larger in scope, I think, than sculptural work. So if you have a sculptural work, you actually have a three-dimensional object. But if you have paintings, you have a two-dimensional object, which is actually viewable in multiple dimensions if you're capable of expanding into those other dimensions. One is the illusion of making it a three-dimensional object, but there's also the fact that paintings can draw you into them, and they can take up your visual scope, whereas sculptures, you walk around and they are a object in the environment. A painting is an environment that you fall into. So I think that's endlessly fascinating.
A little like Alice in Wonderland.
It is Alice in Wonderland. I do like Alice in Wonderland, and she falls into the hole and everything, and then you find this reality that does not necessarily make sense. And a painting can be like that. And on the other hand, a painting can be a very flat thing that doesn't pull you in at all. A painting can be, once again, something that's simply decorative, and it has no quality beyond that two-dimensional thing on the wall.
And does that type of work interest you?
Well, like most people, I like decorative things. I like a pretty room. But we're not making pretty rooms. We're making art. That's a different thing.
Do you find that your work is more relevant in a historical perspective because of its subject matter?
Well, everybody would like to think that.
But do you?
Well, I would hope that I'm one of everybody. I think that's obvious.
Do you really think you're one of everybody?
That's an interesting and pointed question. Am I one of everybody? That would make me egotistical if I were to say that I was different from everybody else. And isn't everybody egotistical in thinking that they're different from everybody else? For me to point it out in and of itself for myself would be to admit to being egotistical. But of course, to not admit to being egotistical is egotistical.
And if your work is like everybody else's, what is the social
If
relevance
your work
of
is like
that?
everybody else's, what's the point of making art? There are millions and millions of artists. And because there are so many artists, you will find millions of the same thing, the same subject, the same attempts at perfection of a line, of a color, of a flesh. And nobody wants to be known as the person incapable of creating those perfect lines, flesh, or other. But ultimately, you're competing with the same attempt at the same point. And so there's going to be thousands of reproductions of the same kind of thing. If you're trying to make artwork, you may not actually want to be someone who's separate from that group, because now you're out on the limb, you're on the edge, and there's no guarantee of any kind of success, financially or otherwise, recognition or anything. You're going to end up being by yourself, and as you say, exceptional from the rest. So ultimately what you want is what you are capable of doing. And if you're capable of doing something, you might as well do it to the best of your abilities. And that may come up with something new.
What do you consider more important? The work and the integrity of the work, or the work being seen?
See, it's again, it's the same question. When you are young and you discover your various talents, and your talents are something that you may or may not be able to use to make a living, and you're young, you're not thinking about that. At least I wasn't. What you're thinking about is, well, I'm good at this. And you start to spend more and more of your time producing and working with what you're good at. I suppose it's like an athlete. You discover that you're really good at running. You're really good at swimming. You're really good at whatever it is. Math, science, religion, philosophy, it doesn't matter. If you discover that you're good at this thing, and this thing being art, then you go out and you try to do it to the best of your abilities. And the whole concept of then being recognized as an artist, or being very good at creating work that stands up to some quality, whatever you determine the quality is, that becomes irrelevant. You are not interested in the success of your work by a recognition of your work by others. You're not interested in the quality of the work that you're producing. You're interested in the success of doing what you're good at. And once you find that, everything else can either start falling into line, or you just live with it and you carry on, because ultimately, if you're not doing what you're good at, then what are you doing? You're just wasting time.
Your battery powers are about out.
My battery, wasting time. That's a good reason to,
No, it's been flashing for the last 4 questions.
It's going to keep flashing.
Okay. So, let's see. What else should we talk about?
I don't know. I suspect this interview is over.
You suspect?
Yes.
I don't know that you have enough material to work with yet. I think we should grill you some more.
It's not important. It's not important to come up with material. The length of a video isn't what you're after. What you're after is, does it work? Is it successful? Does the painting succeed? If the painting doesn't succeed, then put it aside and start on something else. It's like Leonardo da Vinci. You have a room, a studio full of what you consider to be trash, and other people will look at it and say, well, this is interesting. Look at what he started working with. He doesn't even finish most of his work. But the ones that he does finish, those are the ones that are masterpieces. And it doesn't mean it's a masterpiece because it's the ones that survived. It's a masterpiece because it represents something that he was after. Okay? That he completed. He pulled it to completion. All the rest of it are exercises. You know.
How many masterpieces do you think are theoretically possible for an artist in his lifetime?
Depends on the era he lives in. You know, if he lived in the past when there was no television, no cars, no airplanes, you had to make your own materials, whether or not you had someone who was providing you with the funds. You can create a lot of works, but it doesn't mean they're all going to be masterpieces, because if you're producing just to satisfy your clients, then most of this is just going to be exercises, and the masterpieces will be few and far between. You live in the modern era, there's all kinds of distractions, there's all kinds of requirements, there's all kinds of bills to pay. You can create, of course, different kinds of works that take less time, video, photography, animation. There's so many things to draw your attention away from what you're ultimately good at. And maybe you experiment with all these things, and these things become drafts, ideas laid down on paper or on your computer. And I have a ton of that kind of crap. Everybody is probably producing, to some extent, these things, these distractions, these drafts. And they have a few masterpieces. And I saw a piece by Fish just the other day on the internet, on Facebook, and it was absolutely brilliant. Brilliant, beautiful work. You know, he said he worked on that for half a year or something. Can you imagine? I mean, most artists don't spend that amount of time in the modern era producing a single piece of work. He doesn't even go out looking for galleries. He shuns that information, but perhaps because he doesn't want the rejection, but perhaps because he doesn't have the time. Perhaps he's just trying to make a living. But that's going to be the case with a lot of artists. So masterpieces, who knows what masterpieces exist until after you're done painting. After